Good morning. As you are getting settled, I know we have people still kind of filing in, but if you wanted to drop it in the chat window, hi, Jenny, good morning. If you want to drop it in the chat window where you're joining us from today, and especially if we have any CEA members present today. So I know we have people still filing in, but in the interest of time, I know we have a big presentation this morning, so want to get this going for everyone. So hi everyone, welcome to 2023 Mid-Year Labor Law Update. This is sponsored by the City of Glendale Economic Development Division. My name is Anna Manzano. I am the Digital Media and Event Strategist here at the California Employers Association. Before we can begin today's webinar, I have just a couple housekeeping details to go over with you. Your audio will be muted throughout today's training, but we do ask for your participation anyway. If you have questions pertaining to the presentation, you can type them into the Q&A box at any time, and we will try to address them as we go. We have two amazing trainers today, and they're going to be, one will be training and one will be helping with questions, so it's going to be great. Handouts for this presentation should have been attached to the reminder email coming from City of Glendale. If you need them resent, please put your email into the chat box and we will work on getting those resent over to you. Lastly, we have a survey. Because your feedback is incredibly important to us, please, we have a survey that I'll drop a link at the end. There's also a QR code. It takes less than 2 minutes and it really does provide us as well as City of Glendale, our sponsors today, with really valuable information to continue to develop these resources and trainings for you. Speaking of resources, today's webinar, again, is brought to you by the City of Glendale Economic Development Division. And today we have Ani Pogosian, Economic Development Coordinator, to share more about these resources available to you. Ani, it's all yours.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much for the introduction. As Anna stated, my name is Ani Pogosian. I'm with the City of Glendale's Economic Development Division. The City of Glendale has partnered with the CEA to host a series of webinars to help answer your employer-employee questions. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on mid-year labor law updates. It is my honor to introduce our guest speaker, Eli Nunes and Heather Bischoff, who bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to our event today. Eli is a strategic, pragmatic HR professional who has a vast amount of experience in manufacturing, agriculture, construction, and distribution settings. Eli has a 20+ year HR career and has worked for Rite Aid, Target, Color Spot Nurseries, and more. Heather joined CEA as a fractional HR business partner for California Employers Association in early 2023. Her career started as an instructional designer, where she quickly discovered her ability to bring people together through communication and leadership while building meaningful relationships. With that said, we encourage you all to ask questions in our Q&A chat box. This session will be recorded for your future reference as well. Thank you so much, Eli and Heather. Please take it away.
Thank you so much. We're excited to be here. I am going to just jump in, but before we jump in, feel free to put in the chat if this is the first time you've heard the labor law updates for this year, or if this is a second or third time. I know I used to listen to these webinars multiple times just so that I could absorb all of the changes, and there have been some significant changes for 2023. So CEA, we are the employer association for the state of California. We serve, all employers in California. We provide, answers to questions through hotlines, through, members call our lines to talk to our HR, directors. We have toolkits, policies, forms, handbooks, We do trainings for supervisors, consultation on workplace issues and negotiation. We're kind of like having your, a whole back office HR team for a fraction of the cost. And so it's a great resource for anybody to have. Eli and I are not attorneys, and so, we're not going to pretend to be attorneys. I know I certainly am not going to pretend to be an attorney. So if there's any legal, advice that you would like or questions that you have, we, encourage you to seek your general counsel. If you're not sure, on our website, we have a partners page where there are some attorneys that you can reach out to if you have any of those questions. So today, what we're going to be covering is the pay transparency. That was fairly new for this year. I know it was a big thing for a lot of people, so we're going to talk about that and how to do it. Cannabis rights, which are coming soon. California Family Rights Act expansion, the CFRA, which we're going to go into. Agency and local ordinance and updates, and then looking ahead. All right, it looks like we have a lot of first timers, which is exciting. So let's jump in. SB 1162, the pay transparency overview. So first, all employers, they must provide the pay scale to any current employee who requests it. And then also you must maintain the records of a job title and wage rate history for each employee during the employment and for 3 years after separation. So, if you haven't already done this, make sure that, whether you have electronic records or paper records, that, you do have a filing system to maintain the history of the job title and wage rate history for every single employee. If you have 15 or more employees, you also have to include the pay scale for a position in any job posting, which we're going to kind of jump into this a little bit deeper. And, the purpose of this really was, it's aimed at closing the gender gap. There's a lot of states, for example, Colorado, Nevada, Washington, Connecticut, with their own version of this law. And there are more states coming on to, doing the same practice. So I imagine it's just a matter of time before all states are doing a version of these same practices. So you may be wondering how pay scale is defined and what are earnings? What does that include? And how do I do this? So essentially, I'm going to move this one slide. Thank you. Okay, so if the position is an hourly or salary wage, it's based on a piece rate or a commission. And so the piece rate or the commission range must also be included. However, it doesn't need to include bonuses, tips, or other benefits beyond the base rate. It should include at least the lowest and the highest paid person in a position at your company. And keep in mind that you can expand the pay scale beyond those data points. But for, when we look at the pay scale, this is essentially what is included. So we're going to jump into this a little bit more so that, again, just think about, it's what the employer reasonably expects to pay for the position. That is a key aspect of this, because I know sometimes, there's a lot of questions around, how do I do this? What do I include? Do I have to include this or that? And so always go back to what is reasonably, expected. So here's an example. For each position, again, you want to include at least the lowest pay and the highest paid currently at your organization. So if you're figuring out, the pay scale for your HR manager role, which is an exempt role, so here's an example. Eric Hastings is at, the minimum salary, $64,480. Hannah is at $72,500. Elizabeth is at $78,000. So then based on this data, the pay scale should be, at the low end, Eric Hastings, the $64,480, and at the high end, Elizabeth at $78,000. And so consider whether you should expand the pay scale depending on what you would be willing to pay based on skills, prior experience, whatever. So you could post the pay scale as is. You could pad it a little bit on, not on the lower end because that is the law, but on the, upper end if you wanted to. And so also, for our members, we have an incredible toolkit. So if you have not yet done this, our toolkit has a great spreadsheet that makes it really easy to calculate this for your entire organization. So if you have 15 or more employees, keep in mind, because this question comes up a lot, what does 15 employees mean? So basically it's 15 employees located anywhere and at least one employee currently located in California. So, and I would guess that is probably similar in some of the other states that are doing this. But for today, if you have at least 15 employees total, doesn't matter where they're working, and at least one in California, that you are 15 or more. So in that case, you have to count everyone on your payroll, full-time and part-time, regular, temporary, exempt, non-exempt, etc. And the requirement is that you must include that pay scale that we just talked about in the job posting using third-party recruiters. So the pay scale also has to be listed in the posting itself. You can't link it to a QR code or to another place. Wherever people are seeing that job posting, that pay scale needs to be included. And it applies to any position that could be filled in California. So even if maybe the company is headquartered somewhere else in the country, if the position could be filled in California, it must include that pay scale. Let's talk a little bit about job posting compliance. Again, you have to include the entire pay scale for the position, not just the hiring range. However, you can include the hiring / starting range as additional information or clarification. So what happens if you don't post the entire pay scale? There are penalties up to $10,000 per violation, which is assessed by the labor commissioner. And so keep that in mind that, if you are, caught, this could be really costly for you. There is an opportunity to cure if an employer can show that all job postings have been updated after the initial violation. So this is really important. This did start in January of 2023. So if you have jobs that you're posting and you haven't, I would encourage you to update them and include that pay scale. And again, if you need help with figuring out how to do that pay scale, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to, work with you to help you get that completed. But let's, talk a little bit about the 6 steps that it takes to be compliant in pay scales. So the first step is just, again, listing all of your job positions. So I would encourage you to, have somebody on your team or multiple people on your team who can help you with this project if you haven't done it already. But again, list all the job positions, then you're going to ensure that all the job descriptions are accurate. We recommend that people, are reviewing the job descriptions at a minimum semi-annually. However, depending on your organization, if you, have a lot of turnover, we do recommend that you're reviewing those job descriptions more often to make sure that they're accurate and they're reflecting, current job duties and they're categorized correctly. The third step is reviewing all payroll records. Again, looking at, what are people being paid for those jobs. Then you're going to go ahead and create the pay scales based off of the information you've already gathered. Once you've, gathered all of that information, you're going to review the pay scale and just kind of, look at it. And then again, you want to audit and update those pay scales, on a regular cadence to make sure that they are accurate and that you have, good, clean data. Again, CEA has a toolkit for this. So if this is, something that, as we talk through these steps, feels very overwhelming, we do have a toolkit that really simplifies this whole process. So a few tips to stay compliant. Keep in mind those of another sex, race, ethnicity are guaranteed equal pay for substantially similar work. This is part of why, pay transparency in the pay scales was instituted. Do not seek salary history information in hiring. This is another change. So you don't want to ask what someone was making in a prior position. In 2023, employers of all sizes must retain the job title, the wage history records, and be prepared to respond to pay scale requests from current employees and applicants. And again, if you have 15 or more employees, you have to also include those the pay scales in all job postings. So again, that was a very quick overview of that. However, as I said before, we do have the pay scales toolkit that can help you through this. This is not something that's going to go away. So if you're even a little bit unsure of if you're doing it correctly, feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to help. Now that we've talked about all of the heavy stuff, let's move over and talk about cannabis in the workplace, as there has been some changes and will be some changes for 2024. So, you know, as we look back, Prop 64 allows for the use of marijuana recreational for those 21 and older. They can have, you know, possession, transportation, and, you know, they can have, you know, growing for adults 21 and older, 1 ounce of marijuana or 8 grams of concentrated cannabis, or 6 plants per residence, and possession of the marijuana produced by those plants. So under, you know, Prop 64, you may not consume marijuana in any public space. There is a $100 fine for that. And then, you know, smoke or vaporize in any non-smoking area, you can't do that, or within 1,000 feet of a school, a daycare, youth center while children are present, except at a private residence. So, you know, you can't consume marijuana or possess an open container while driving or riding as a passenger in any motor vehicle, boat, airplane, etc. Possession or use of marijuana on the grounds of a school is not okay, or to manufacture concentrated cannabis with a volatile solvent, again, except for the state licensed manufacturers. And minors under 21 cannot possess, use, transport, or cultivate marijuana, subject again to a fine for those 18 or older. Minors under 18 are subject to drug counseling and community service. So there's a lot of things that are, you know, out there. So keep in mind that rights that are not protected by 64, Prop 64, owners may forbid the possession or use of marijuana on their property, subject to normal tenant law for renters. And employers may prohibit the use of marijuana by their employees. And if you're wondering, according to several marijuana growing websites, a single marijuana plant can produce up to 5 ounces of usable marijuana. That's just under 2 pounds of marijuana coming from 6 plants. So again, in 2016, Prop 64, you know, was passed, which legalized non-medical recreational cannabis. And so we kind of went through a lot of this. So in California, adults 21 and older are allowed to smoke or ingest cannabis in a private home and possess small amounts of non-medical cannabis. The federal law still remains illegal, including medical purposes. So again, so what has changed? So the new protected class, cannabis users, AB 2188, begins January 1st, 2024. So starting in January 1st of this coming year, there's a new protected class under FIHA, which is also the Civil Rights Department in California, for those who use cannabis off duty. So that is the key. So employers cannot discriminate or take advantage or take adverse action against an employee or an applicant for using cannabis while off the job and away from the workplace. It still does not permit an employee to possess or be impaired by cannabis while on the job. And so there's a few exceptions, but also keep in mind that, you know, it is still a federally controlled substance. it will change in 2024. So let's talk about some of those exceptions. So it doesn't apply to building and construction trades, positions that require a federal background investigation or security clearance. It doesn't interfere with state federal laws and requiring controlled substance testing. Example, if there is, DOT transportation workers. So you may be wondering, are employers still permitted to test applicants for cannabis in 2024? And so this is the big question. Will the technology be able to catch up to distinguish the difference? So basically, the answer is yes and no. Employers may test for THC, which is the chemical compound in cannabis that can indicate impairment and cause psychoactive effects. THC tests can detect use within the last few hours. So that is a key. If you are drug testing, you can kind of use it a little bit, but employers cannot test for non-psychoactive cannabis metabolites, which are stored in the body after THC is metabolized. These metabolites do not necessarily indicate impairment, but indicate use in the last few weeks, according to California legislature. So a few key takeaways here, and I do want to look at, see if there's any questions in the chat. Okay. So remember, outside of pre-employment screening, reasonable suspicion is typically required to test employees. So again, if there's reasonable suspicion that someone is impaired, you can still have them drug tested. That doesn't change. But I would go back and look at your policies and your handbook to make sure that that is spelled out really clear. What is reasonable suspicion and what is your process? You want to make sure that you are enforcing your policies consistently and without any prejudice. And finally, you always want to make sure that you maintain employee confidentiality. If there is reasonable suspicion, or if someone does test positive, that you have a procedure of how you are going to address that. Okay, let's shift gears and move over to CFRA, and we're talking 5 or more employees. So CFRA, it provides up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave and guaranteed reinstatement at the end of the leave. So essentially it is 12 weeks of job protection. And employees' benefits are going to continue during their leave. So the employer is going to continue to pay the employer part, and the employee would be, responsible to pay their portion of their benefits during that 12-week period. Make sure that you know what your look back period is, because it's 12 weeks within a specified 12-month period for eligible employees. So some people use a calendar year. Some people have a look back period from the last time that the leave was used. An employee is eligible for CFRA if they have worked 12 months for an employer and 1,250 hours in the prior 12-month period. A CFRA runs separately from pregnancy disability leave. And also, just keep in mind that I know a lot of people ask this question. CFRA and FMLA eligibility requirements are largely the same: 12 months of service, 1,250 hours in the previous month. Group insurance benefits, continue. The covered reasons under CFRA expand covered family members and also provide leave for qualifying military emergencies, which used to only be available under FMLA, but note that FMLA 26 military caregiver leave still does not apply to CFRA. So let's look at some of the covered reasons. Baby bonding, which is the birth of a child. This could be adoption or foster care. An employee's own serious health condition. This could include workers' comp, but not pregnancy. Family and armed forces. Again, you have a family member that's on active duty status with the armed forces, or it could be family care. Perhaps you are responsible to care for a family member with a serious health condition. So AB 1041 talks about, again, the paid sick leave and CFRA. What is a designated person? I think this is something, that's come up a lot, and people really are kind of curious as, what does that actually mean in California? So again, employees may use mandatory paid sick leave or take leave under the California Family Rights Act to care for a designated person. So essentially in 2023, an employee may designate who that person is at the time of the leave, request. It does not have to be a relative, a blood, related relative. It could be someone that, that is truly under their care. The employer, though, can set a limit that an employee can only have one designated person per 12-month period. So again, make sure that you are updating your employee handbook to really talk about what is a designated person and who is a designated person, because it can be any individual related by blood or whose association with the employee is the equivalent to a family relationship. So again, that's CFRA defines that designated person as any individual that is related by blood or whose association with the employee is equivalent to a family relationship. And so it is also very similar for the paid sick leave. This is essentially, a lot of people today have chosen family, which may not be a blood relation. So keep that in mind and make sure to update your handbook. Also important to update your handbook is on AB 1949, bereavement leave. There have been some changes. Again, if you have 5 or more employees, you must provide eligible employees up to 5 days of unpaid bereavement leave upon the death of a covered family member. So basically, any employee who has been with you for 30 days before the leave is eligible, and they do have 3 months to use their 5 days. They don't have to take them consecutively. It can be intermittent, and the employer, you can request some documentation. It could be a death certificate. It could be the published obituary. Again, you want to make sure that this is clear in your handbook. And some employers have questions about the 5 days. So the leave is unpaid, but some companies, maybe they offer 2 or 3 days of paid leave. In this case, you would maintain your current policies. They would have 3 days of paid leave and 2 days of unpaid leave that they could take. Again, it's important to maintain confidentiality. Covered family members for bereavement leave would be a spouse, domestic partner, a child, a parent-in-law, a sibling, a grandparent, or a grandchild. It is also really important to note the distinction that the leave is per death, not per year. So if you have an employee that, unfortunately experiences several deaths in 1 year, they are entitled to 5 days of leave for each death, not just 1 per year. So keep that in mind. All right, and as I wrap up and prepare to hand this off to Eli, here are your key takeaways. So there's policy updates. Please make sure that you update your handbook, PSL and CFRA. The policy should include a designated person. Update or add the bereavement policy. So if you don't have one, make sure that you do have one before the end of the year. There's been some form updates. Again, the form, to make sure that you add as a designated person for a PSL and CFRA. And then make sure that your posters are updated for the current year. And then if you need help with your handbook, maybe it hasn't been updated in a long time. Maybe you just, need somebody to do it for you. Reach out to us. That is something that we provide to our members. So we would be happy to do that for you. And with that, I'm going to pause for a moment and let Eli take it over from here.
Thank you very much, Heather. A lot of good information there. You got the lion's share of all the new stuff there. So, I mean, definitely, I mean, I just want to remind everybody, make sure you're updating all your policies, updating your handbooks. That's one of the things that's very, very easy to forget, right? We get these changes that start at the beginning of the year, snowball things going on. So make sure that your handbooks are up to date and you're redistributing those. But I'm going to move on to some agency and local ordinance updates for some of the things that have changed, some of the things that have stayed the same. Let's talk about it a little bit and see, what you should be looking out for. So the first thing, and I will preempt it by saying, please, I am just a messenger. Let's talk about COVID. I know everyone's really, really tired of talking about COVID, right? We've been talking about this for a couple of years, but let's talk about, some of the changes, what's changed, what stayed the same. So thing to keep in mind is that earlier this year, there was a permanent standard set by Cal OSHA, right? And as you remember, if you've been keeping up with this last couple of years, there was a lot of changes. It seemed that things changed every week, every month, sometimes every day as far as the requirements, right? So basically back in February, Cal OSHA, came up with a standard for COVID and how to deal with it that was going to be, basically carry us over all the way through February 2025, right? And certain record keeping portions of it will go all the way through 2026. So again, some of these things will not go away. And the thing to keep in mind is a lot of the things that were put in this temporary standard was just the things in the emergency temporary standard requirements. So again, the first requirement is that COVID prevention program, right? Hopefully you all have one in place. This is something that many people think is similar to the injury and illness protection plan, right? And the COVID prevention program is not something that's extremely, intricate, difficult, that sort of thing. I mean, the state does provide us a template for it. And if you go to our website, whether you're a member or not, we do have a section that is all dedicated to COVID. That's free for anybody. You don't have to be a member to access, and you could access the template for the COVID prevention program in there. So, it's basically a fill in the blank sort of thing. You look at your organization and you are going to list the steps that you're going to take to help prevent, mitigate, and deal with any kind of COVID situation in your workplace, right? Additionally, to this permanent standard dealt with anything that you have to do during an outbreak, right? And as we know, those definitions of an outbreak do change from time to time. So just keep in mind that there are certain things that we have to take. Some significant changes too is that daily screening that we had to do for a couple of years ago, where people are walking in your office or your place of work, and you had to aim that thermometer at their foreheads and take their temperature. That is no longer mandatory, right? As well as exclusion pay, that also went away now. That doesn't mean that you can't do it, for things like daily screening or self-attestation forms or anything. As a matter of fact, I just visited a member last week that was still doing the daily screenings, the temperature checks, that sort of thing. So as with any kind of state regulation, you're always free to go above and beyond the requirements to keep your employees safe, as long as you're not doing it in a discriminatory fashion, right? As long as you're not saying, well, I'm only going to scan the temperature of anybody below a certain age or anybody that's a certain gender or anything. As long as you're doing it across the board, you are fine. So some more updates as far as COVID. This is from the California Department of Public Health. They did update our isolation or quarantine guidelines. As you recall, initially it was if anybody was exposed or tested positive, it was a 10-day quarantine. Now we are at the point where if somebody tests positive or has the symptoms, they may end isolation after the 5th day, as long as there is marked improvement, right? So if their symptoms are improving, if that congestion, cold, body aches, and all that is going away, and if they are fever-free for 24 hours, and that's without the use of any fever-reducing medication, right? So without your ibuprofens or whatever it is. So if that's the case, then they can return, but you can still have them, they're still going to wear a mask for 10 days after returning from that positive test or from having those conditions, right? And more importantly, too, there's also changes to healthcare and high-risk settings. As you remember, those were the ones that probably had the most restrictions, right, as far as masking, as far as mandatory vaccination and everything. Well, those requirements did go away per the California Department of Public Health. There's no longer a vaccination requirement for healthcare workers, and masks are no longer required in those settings, unless, of course, you do have an outbreak or somebody tested positive or is returning from an illness or that sort of thing. And again, independent settings can always require to go above and beyond those mandates, right? So again, as you can see, exception, you can still require masking after close contact during outbreaks or as required by local ordinances. And as different cities, different locations do have their own set of rules sometimes that may go above and beyond what the state requires. So, be aware of what is required in your municipality just to make sure that it's not anything that goes beyond what the state is asking for. And if you have any questions, of course, you can always give us a call at the hotline, right? We'll go over that number at the end. Moving on from COVID, as I wish we all would, right? Even though you see the news, it doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon. Let's talk about minimum wage. And, we'll start first with some of the local minimum wage laws that have changed, right? So as you know, there's certain areas, whether it's Southern California or the Bay Area, that have different minimum wage ordinances as opposed to the state, right? So we have a state minimum wage, and then different cities or different counties can establish minimum wages that are higher or above what the state requires. And not only minimum wage too, but some of them do establish some different sick leave or in predictive scheduling or flex time rules as well that apply to all employers or all work done within their area, right? So you may say, well, City of Glendale doesn't have anything like that. Why do I care? Well, because if you have employees that either work remotely and live in one of these areas or actually go and do work, a significant amount of work in one of these areas, they travel there for work, then you should be aware of what those requirements are because those do protect those employees while they are working there. So again, be very aware of that, be very aware of where your employees are and, what protections they have. So some of the notable increases, again, just a few highlights. We have the California state law, which is 1550 effective January 1st of this year. And, a lot of people thought we were done with increases when we hit $15 an hour, right? But lo and behold, there was something, and there was a law there that goes all the way back to the Jerry Brown days that said, if inflation goes beyond a certain point, then mandatory minimum wage increases kick in, right? And as you know, the economy hasn't really been what it could have been the last couple of years. So it did trigger one of these things. So that's why we had that 50-cent increase at the beginning of this year. Some other notable counties, San Mateo County in the Bay Area, up to 1650. And they actually had an increase in near mid-year, right? Most of the time we see these increases happen at the beginning of the year and then in the middle of the year, July 1st. Well, San Mateo County decided they were going to be a little different this year and did their increase on April 1st. They're free to do so, just a little different. But some other places, Alameda, Berkeley, Fremont, the usual suspects you'd expect, right? San Francisco, Los Angeles City, and then the county and unincorporated areas also have different minimum wages again. So be aware of where your employees are, where the work is being performed, just to make sure you're within those minimum wage requirements, okay? And we do have that bit.ly link there. You can go there to see what the minimum wage is throughout the state in different areas, different cities, counties, whatever it is. Another interesting development that we saw that especially took hold in Southern California this year was the Fair Work Week ordinances. And some people may have heard of this. Basically what this is more of a predictive scheduling for people, right? A predictability in pay. And a lot of times we see these, take hold in retail environments, right? Or larger employers. And what those are is basically they restrict as far as when you can move people's schedules around. So what they want is for you to be able to set people's schedules a certain amount ahead of time. So whether it's a month ahead of time or a few weeks ahead of time, you set their schedule, and that's what it is without any changes, right? And again, that should help them as far as budgeting, as far as scheduling, as far as timeliness, that sort of thing. So again, this is only at this point only applies to certain businesses, certain industries, but take a look, right? And again, some of the places that we have for 2023, we have Los Angeles. They have that in place, Berkeley, San Francisco, and Emeryville. And before I move on, we do have a question here. Someone asked, can we explain when you have two offices in two different cities, which wage or laws apply to each office or location? And if you have offices in different locations, basically it is based on where the place of work is. So if you have, say, an office in, LA and one in Glendale, your office in LA would have to follow or abide by the rules in Los Angeles. So for example, if Los Angeles mandates 5 sick days for anybody that works in Los Angeles and Glendale only has 3, your employees in Los Angeles would get 5 days. Your employees in Glendale would only get 3, right? It depends on where the place of work is. And this is important to keep in mind too if you have remote employees. If you have remote employees, basically your office in Glendale, but you have a remote employee that works in Los Angeles, they work from home, and that is where their home base is, so to speak. That is their place of work. Then you would have to abide by the rules and regulations and rights in Los Angeles. So again, it depends where the place of work is located. Those are the rules you have to follow. So that's why it's important. Again, just because the rules don't apply to where you're located at, if you have another place of work that is in one of these areas, Los Angeles, Berkeley, Emeryville, whatever it is, then you're going to have to be aware and abide by those rules. And again, not only minimum wage, but we're also looking at sick time and other protections as well. A perfect example too. I mean, we know with COVID, there was that COVID sick leave that ended earlier this year. Well, there was one city in the state, I won't call them out by name, but there was one city where the COVID emergency did not end up until a month ago. So they still had COVID sick pay up until June, even though it ended throughout the state earlier in the year. So that's why it's important to be aware, where your employees live if you have remote work, and also where they work, what the regulations are if you have separate offices in separate cities. All right, let's move on to the I-9. And anybody that's in the HR world with us, this is hot news for us. This is the exciting stuff that gets us out of bed every morning, right? We got a change in the I-9. I know, exciting stuff here. But first, let's talk about flexibilities, right? And what the flexibilities were is when COVID first started, everybody seemed like everybody that was possible shut their doors and sent everybody to work remotely, right? And as we know, the world didn't stop. We still had to hire people. We still had to expand our workforce. Some people left. There was turnover, etc. So we found ourselves having to hire some people. So if we were working remotely due to COVID, the federal government, mainly Customs and Immigration and ICE, allowed us to remotely verify their documentation. So as you know, as part of the new hire process, somebody comes in, they fill out the I-9, they hand us their documents, any documents that they're choosing from either A or B and C on the I-9 form. We look at them, verify that they look authentic, fill out the form, and move on, right? Well, since we're fighting the plague for a couple of years, the federal government allowed, hey, you could verify these remotely. You could have somebody fax you a copy. You could have somebody, you could view it through video or whatever it is. Well, now that COVID has wound down for a bit, the federal government has pulled back those flexibilities. And basically, those flexibilities expired on July 31st, but they gave us a grace period up until the end of August, up until August 30th, to physically examine any documents and update any I-9 forms for anybody that we may have verified remotely, right? So if there was anybody that you verified, over video, or you just had them fax you or text you or email you a copy of their documents, you have to physically verify those forms by August 30th. And again, you could do it yourself. You could have another member of your team do it as long as they've been trained on it, or you could have an authorized third-party representative do it as well. Now, it's important to keep in mind, if you have been using E-Verify for the past couple of years, and this has to go, going backwards, you can't just sign up for E-Verify today and use this option. E-Verify users still have a remote verification option for documents. But again, it's not something where you can just sign up for E-Verify today and just say, well, I'm an E-Verify, so I'm just going to use remote, use my rights to verify documents remotely. You have to have been signed up in E-Verify at the time. All right, another question popped up here. Let's see. We have one in regards to minimum wage. Reference to incorporated cities versus unincorporated cities. My advice to that would be if, for example, in Los Angeles, we have the unincorporated areas, I would recommend going to the website. They have a very good interactive setup there where you can type in the address or the city to see if it's something that falls within that area, right? I'm not thoroughly familiar with the geography down there, so I'd say if you have any doubt as far as to whether you fall into the incorporated versus unincorporated area, go onto the Los Angeles website and see which one you fall into. All right. All right, moving on with the I-9 form there. Some other changes, of course. The new I-9 form was finally released, right? They announced last year that there was work on the new I-9 form. They put on the Federal Register so people could comment on it and everything. Well, we finally got the new and improved form on July 25th of this year. And as soon as there was news that the form was released, we started getting a few panic calls from members, right? Oh my God, do I have to use it? I haven't seen it. What's the training on it, et cetera, et cetera. Well, um, I mean, basically, the federal government gave us a grace period, right? Just because they released a new form doesn't mean that we have to drop everything, burn all the old forms, and start using the new one. They gave us until October 31st of this year, until Halloween, that we can still use the existing form, right, before transitioning. I mean, the changes are not super drastic. Let's be honest with you. And if anything, we've taken a look at the new form, we've played around with it. It is a little bit more user-friendly, it cleaned it up a little bit more. I basically did reduce the number of instruction pages on there, and it removed the re-verification section to a whole other form. So, if you remember the old form, there was a re-verification section on the bottom. It was a 2-pager. It was kind of everything was kind of clustered together. It kind of broke it up a little bit, so you don't have to use that re-verification form unless you have to, right? So it's, like I said, cleaned it up quite a bit. So take a look at it, play around with it. If you have any hires here in the next couple of weeks, you still have until October 31st to use the old form if you're that comfortable, but go ahead and jump on the new form. Something else that developed with the new I-9 form was that on March 31st of this year, Customs and Immigration basically gave us guidance on how an individual can self-identify for their gender, right? So basically what their guidance is that a requester can select their gender without needing any supporting documentation, right? Even if that doesn't match their list of documents. So if they, if they presented a birth certificate shows, one gender, they can change it to however they identify, right?
Eli, we have a
Yes,
question. We have a question that I wanted
yes,
to read to you.
yes.
So who can be an authorized third party for the I-9s?
That is the $1 million question, right? Who can do it? So um there in California basically says, and I'm correct if I'm wrong, you use like an immigration attorney to do it. But there are also other companies that offer this service, right? Now a lot of people say, well, can you be a notary? Can you just have a notary do it? Well, as you know, I mean, the I-9 doesn't require to be notarized, so notary is not really necessary, right? So you can go like for an authorized immigration attorney. And there's companies, and I'll just say it because the first one comes to mind, like Experian, I believe, is one that I see the advertisement for, that they advertise that they could do that I-9 verification for you. So again, this is important for those employers that are maybe out of state, that have California employees where they don't want to fly in or meet the employee or anything. Take a look at these companies or local immigration attorneys, and you can use them for that verification. I would love to tell you that it's free. It's not. As with anything else, they will charge you for the service, but take a look. And again, I said, as I mentioned, Experian comes to mind just because I have seen them advertise it specifically. And as far as the remote option for verification, that is available if you do have E-Verify. So if you have been, and if you have had E-Verify, if you have been an E-Verify user as an employer, you can still use that remote verification. However, if you use the paper I-9 forms, that remote verification exception for COVID did end, so you have to physically verify those documents. And I mean, if nothing else, it might be a good chance to travel to meet your employee, grab lunch, and take a look at their documents at the time. But all right. Now we come to the section where we like to bring out the old CEA crystal ball and look ahead to see what the coming year is bringing to us, right? So some of the things we'll discuss, and I will preempt this again. I'm only the messenger. Let's talk about minimum wage for 2024. I hate to say it, but it is going up again. And that's what it's looking like. It's looking like we are going to have an increase for 2024, right? The Fair Chance Act, there's been changes to that. That's, Fair Chance Act, ban the box, it's gone by different names. We'll talk about the economy and layoffs a little bit, what remote work's going to look like, a little bit about Chat GPT, some interesting bills or regulations that are in the work to watch, and a little bit about well-being in the workplace too. I'd like to touch on that in this presentation. Another question came up about I-9 verification too, as far as can an authorized rep be an employee's family member or neighbor? Basically,
Eli, I
yes.
can,
You want
yeah,
to jump in
there
that
are
one?
some
Okay.
services.
Mhm.
Yeah, I worked with a staffing company and this came up a lot because we were in 39 different states. And one of the things that we found is kind of like Eli was sharing earlier, there are services out there. There's some apps and that sort of thing. So technically you could have a neighbor or a friend doing that, but it's going to be through the app and they are going to be signing essentially a certification form that they are like they're taking on that responsibility of saying like I'm telling you the truth, which means that they could be liable if they were to find out that those documents were falsified. So it's not like you can just go to your neighbor and say, hey, be my third party. I would say it should be through through some sort of structured service, if you're going to do that and not actually have someone within your team verifying that.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. And yeah, there's always options, right? If you have, say for example, a regional
Mhm.
manager or something, regional supervisor in the area, have them go through that I-9 training, have them go read through that booklet, and you could use them, locally to do those verifications. A lot of I-9 questions too. I think I think I smell a webinar on I-9 coming up in our future here. So let's talk about minimum wage. Again, there's been announcements. We are looking for another increase in 2024, right? And this is for all non-exempt employees. If you remember in the past, some have been scaled where if you had, over 20 employees or over 25, it was one, and then something lower for other ones. This is across the board, right? And again, reason for this again is that that inflation. That's about the only thing we can blame for it, right? So basically, there's, you know, they took a look at it. The state took a look at it, said, inflation for the 1 year period from June through July of the previous year was about 6 and some odd change percent. So they basically mandated a 3.5% increase for the upcoming year, right? Um, Now a lot of people say, okay, well, that's terrible news. I mean, as a business owner, you're not going to increase all my hourly employees' wages. Thing to keep in mind too is if you have exempt employees, this is going to affect you as well, right? Because in order to have an exempt employee, for the most part, they have to meet two tests. They have to meet the duties test and the minimum salary test. And as you know, the minimum salary has to be 2 times the minimum wage. So that goes from that's going to take a jump from 64,000 and some change this year to 66,560. That's going to be the minimum salary for your exempt employees effective January 1st of next year. So and for the most part, I mean, it could be mostly bad news from a moral standpoint, right? Oh man, it's taking away wages, it's catching up to our exempt employees, right? But if you have some exempt employees that were right at that threshold, maybe they were making 65,000 or a low 66 because they're either foremen or leads or something, now you have some decisions to make, right? I mean, start planning, do you have to maybe change your classification, move into from salary to hourly? Do you have to plan an increase, that sort of thing? So again, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there are those changes coming up. January 1st, 2024. Take a look at it. Take a look at your workforce. Take a look at your pay scale to see what the adjustment looks like. Of course, that brings other concerns. Are you compressing wages? Are you doing other things? Is the bottom part of your wage scale catching up to the top? I mean, take a look at it. There's options, right? If you have exempt employees that are right at that threshold, maybe it's time to move into non-exempt, right? That comes with its own set of headaches. Then you have to worry about meal and rest periods. You have to worry about overtime, et cetera, et cetera. So start taking a look at it now, plan to see what changes are necessary. And of course, if you're in the industry where you have doctors or computer employees, there are separate increases pending for those workforces as well. So I also mentioned the Fair Chance Act, ban the box, whatever you want to call it. This is the one that basically restricts what we can do as far as background checks, right? And it's been pretty much in place for the past few years, not many changes there. Well, there are some modifications coming up to it, and they're looking at these possibly taking effect maybe right around the October area, right? So what these are going to do is basically extend some of these protections, right? And a lot of times, when we talk about the Fair Chance Act or about ban the box, we think about, the protections for any candidates that we're hiring, right? Possibly new employees, applicants, that sort of thing. Well, what this is going to do is it's going to extend some of those protections to existing employees. So if you have somebody that's maybe up for a promotion or applies for a position internally, they are going to have those protections as far as background checks, criminal background, that sort of thing as well. It's also going to have an effect on job postings, right? Because you cannot put anything on the job ad that indicates that, you will not hire somebody that has a criminal history, or that you won't consider anybody. It's going to restrict what we put in those job postings. Can you say, we perform a background check? Possibly. We'll talk about that here in a bit. And now, the big concern when we talk about, criminal background check, that sort of thing, everyone says, well, what about these positions? What about school teachers? What about childcare? What about babysitters? What about, law enforcement? Does that mean that becomes free for all for them? No. There's still exemptions for any of those positions that are required by state, federal, or local law to conduct criminal background checks or restrict employment, right? So those restrictions are still in place. We can still sleep at night on that one, right? Anybody that's got children in school or childcare or anything like that, those restrictions are still in place. But what this does do is that it's also going to open up the possibility for additional information to be presented to dispute or to play into the decision being made, right? So, for example, if there's any extenuating circumstances that led to the conviction, such as a disability, such as abuse, anything like that, those are all things that can be considered in the decision-making process. However, that's not something that we as employers can request. We can't say, oh, do you have any documentation that, to dispute this or anything like that. That's something that the candidate can volunteer, right? So we're still waiting for us to flesh out a little more, get some more guidance. One thing I do recommend too, though, is if you do background checks, if you are a company that does background checks for your potential hires or for your employees, one, consult your legal counsel, right, to make sure what the changes are and to make sure that you are compliant. And the other is, if you use an outside company, make sure that they are staying ahead of these changes, right? There's a reason why we have these companies, why we contract these companies to take care of this for us, right? And that is so they stay up to date on it, so they can basically let us know, that we're doing things legally and keep us out of trouble. All right. Let's talk about the state of the economy a little bit and what that means for us. So, earlier this year, everything we heard was layoffs, 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 right? Chicken Little sort of thing, sky's falling, and it was a little gloomy there, especially in the beginning of the year, right? I mean, some of the layoff numbers seem pretty drastic, especially in January. You had some of the bigger names, your Amazons, your Alphabet companies that include Google, Microsoft, Zoom, all the tech companies. It seemed like it was maybe the bottom was falling out of it, right? Well, I mean, even though those numbers were drastic in January, that tapered off, right? And even though there are still some layoffs going on right now, I mean, those have pretty much leveled off for the bigger companies. There's still some smaller tech companies or smaller companies in general that are still having to cut back and let some people go, but for the most part, it seems to have tapered off, right? This meant for unemployment, I mean, the numbers were almost flat to last year through the spring, and the rate increased a little bit in June, higher than it was a year ago. So, unemployment did climb up a little bit. Nothing really, really crazy, right? The other thing that we hear a lot about is, population shrink. Everyone's leaving California, right? Packing our bags, moving east, moving to the Midwest, whatever it is. Well, yes, that was, that trend was very, very prevalent, especially during the pandemic, right? Because why wouldn't it be, We have the option to work remotely. We can move, we can, relocate, we can move somewhere cheaper, that sort of thing. So yeah, but as the pandemic wound down, this trend slowed down as well. Now, is there still a shrink going on? Is there still a population reduction going on in California? The numbers do point to it happening, but nothing as drastic as we saw, 2-3 years ago during the thick of the pandemic. So, and some of the things people are pointing at as to why we have that population shrink, right? I mean, decreasing birth rates, cost of living, industries moving out, whatever it is. That's kind of a normal cycle, right? It's a normal cycle for the state, kind of that shrink growth. Right now we're in the shrink, right? So take a look at it, see what it looks like, and more importantly, let's see what it means for our workforce, right? Are we losing viable employees? Is our candidate pool shrinking? Some other things to keep in mind. I mean, we hear about the past generations retiring. Baby boomers were one of our larger generations, and they are reaching that retirement age, So in a lot of cases, I mean, we could see that people are expecting a big wave of retirements. At the same time, we do have this trend where people are staying at jobs a lot longer, right? Older workers are staying in the workplace. So are those things enough to offset each other? That's one thing we're keeping an eye on for the upcoming years, right? What is that going to look like? What's the workforce going to look like for us? Now, when it comes to remote work too, it's not going away, and granted, we know a lot of companies are calling their employees back. Everyone's coming back to the office, etc. But, a lot of things that we are seeing now is hybrid schedules are a thing that's here to stay, right? And some interesting stats here. This is from a Pew Research Group. 35% of workers work 100% remotely. And that's just, maybe the industry shifted, maybe certain industries are lend themselves to a lot more. But the number of people working a hybrid schedule is even higher than that. So this is schedules where, people go into the office maybe once, maybe twice a week, once a month, whatever it is, but work remotely the rest of the time. So again, remote work seems to be here to stay. We know it's not possible for every industry, that's a given, but it is something that employers can look at. And honestly, it is something that some candidates in certain industries are expecting. So if you're in an industry where remote or hybrid work is a possibility and you're resisting that change, you may be losing good candidates to other competitors that do offer that. So just not saying you should do it, not saying you shouldn't, just take a look at what your work is, what your industry can support, and how you can use this to your advantage. Another hot topic we keep hearing about is ChatGPT and AI, artificial intelligence, right? And it's a hot topic. It's the newer generations are talking about a lot more. Those of us that are in the older generations remember the Terminator and maybe approaches with a little more trepidation, right? Oh no, the machines are finally taking over. Well, whatever the case is, let's talk about ChatGPT a little bit. Basically, how and the way we're looking at is how it can affect the workplace, right? We hear a lot, when it first came out about how it was affecting basically schools, basically academics, right? People, kids that were using ChatGPT to write their papers or do their homework for them or what have you. Well, that seems to have tapered off, or people got better at cheating, whatever the case. But we're looking at it, how it can affect the workplace, right? And the way one of the things we see a potential for disruptions in the HR industry, how can you use it for recruiting or onboarding? Can you use it maybe as an interactive application or interview, or as a portal where your candidates go and chat with this artificial intelligence and get their information, right? Maybe for performance management. Some people have had good success with it, creating policies where you can just ask ChatGPT, hey, create a dress code for my company based on this industry, and it'll spit out a policy for you. Will it be perfect? No, probably not, but it gives you a starting point. And of course, employee engagement, right? How can we use it for that? So again, it's a tool that's out there. It's like all tools, it's got its advantages, it's got its limitations, right? It's only as good as the information that's in there. So some things that you should consider or can consider for it is, what are the advantages or limitations to your business, right? Does it apply to what we do? Can it give us an advantage, or is it going to be a nuisance? If we are going to use it, who's allowed to use it? Do we want our everyday employees to use it? Is there an advantage to it, or is it just going to create more chaos? And if we are going to use it, what's our policy on it, right? I mean, believe it or not, it's important to have one out there. And finally, again, how good is the information? How accurate is it? we always recommend when you go this route, always verify the information, right? Because some studies show that yes, ChatGPT is very advanced. It could give us, some good results, but the information may be a little out of date, right? It's only got the information out there that has been put in, and it's still, as much as it's developing, it's still catching up. So always verify the information from there. Let's talk about some bills to watch, things to keep your eye on in the upcoming year. As you know, I mean, the governor Newsom has until mid-October to either sign or veto bills. And these are some of the ones that were making some noise earlier in the year, right? The first one's SB 616, which would expand sick leave from 3 days mandatory in the state of California, 3 days or 24 hours, to 7 days in the state. And the reasoning behind this was that, a lot of people are saying, well, California, as much as it was, very progressive and having sick time and leave and everything, it's kind of fallen behind, falling behind other states or even falling behind certain cities within the state that offer more time. So SB 616, was looking to address this by increasing mandatory sick leave from 3 days to 7. Past committee, it's in the suspense file right now. So we're going to see what the committee decides on it and what the governor decides on that one. The other one was providing FEHA protections to family caregivers. That was AB 524, right? What this would be is basically would designate caregivers as a protected category, as a protected class in the state of California. So again, that another one that's still kind of bogged down right now, but keep this one on your radar. See what happens around October when Governor Newsom starts signing bills. And the last one, we talked about minimum wage earlier, talked about computer professionals in the medical field. Well, SB 525 is floating around out there that would establish a minimum wage for healthcare workers at $25 an hour. So pretty big jump if you think about some of the positions maybe. I mean, healthcare workers, they usually earn more than the minimum wage, but establishing that $25 an hour minimum wage, that could have its own set of ramifications, right? If you're paying people $20 or $18 an hour right now, all of a sudden you bump up to 25. What are the people above them going to do? Are you going to bump them up as well? Or are you going to compress it? Sorry, I talk with my hands a bit, but something to keep in mind, right? So SB 525 is floating around out there. Let's see what happens with that one as well. Another thing being talked about and being worked on right now too is indoor heat illness standard. Now, as you know, heat illness protection, that is huge for outdoor workspaces, right? I'm thinking agriculture, construction, landscaping, that sort of thing. And anybody that's in those industries is pretty familiar with them, right? We have the Cal OSHA training, must provide rest, shade, water, additional breaks, etc. Well, now Cal OSHA, this is something they've been kicking around for a bit. And of course, there was a pause because of the pandemic, but now it is back in the forefront, having an indoor heat illness standard, right? And this is for places, think about places like manufacturing, places like bakeries, places, food manufacturing that has ovens or that sort of thing, where the heat index can really climb in there. So what this would do is provide additional protection for employees in this area and create additional restrictions or additional responsibilities for employers, right? So it'd be a trigger, once temperature reaches a certain amount. So they're talking about 87 degrees right now, and this is an outside temperature, then it would kick in additional protections such as cool down areas would be mandatory. So that could be like an air conditioned break room or lunchroom. Providing water, providing additional breaks, that sort of thing. And this is something Cal OSHA is moving full steam ahead on, so do not be surprised if this is something that rolls out either at the end of this year or early next year. So again, if you're in an industry, again, manufacturing, anything, warehousing, that sort of thing, where the inside temperature could be a concern, keep an eye on this one because there could be additional restriction, training requirements, and work requirements coming your way. Another thing OSHA has taken up is workplace violence and workplace violence protections in the workplace. Right now, currently the healthcare industry has specific regulatory requirements when it comes to workplace violence and providing protection for employees within that area. Well, Cal OSHA is looking to expand that, and they released a draft of regulation for workplace violence prevention in general industry in May of 2022. Again, thick of the pandemic still, not much movement, but they are discussing it again this year. So again, this would just provide additional protection. And some of the concerns with this would be That would prohibit, say, for example, employees from confronting shoplifters or employees from, being ordered to confront shoplifters or do anything that puts them in danger, right? Sounds reasonable, but again, what effect will this have in the workplace? Well, we're waiting to see what that draft looks like, but again, Cal OSHA has taken this up, and we're probably going to see some workplace violence guidance or protections being extended from OSHA for general industry. Not sure if it'll be quite as extensive as what the healthcare industry has right now, but again, they could take away a lot from that and build from that for other industries as well. All right, shifting gears a little bit too, we want to talk about a little bit about bringing humanity into the workplace. And there's a little bit of our wellness section to our labor law update, right? With all the changes that have happened in the past few years, everybody being sent home, everybody coming back to work, remote work, what do we do? Where's our workplace stand? I want to point out a few things that we've identified as very, very useful as far as engagement, as far as keeping your workplace united, safe, secure, however you want to put it, right? And the first thing we have identified, of course, is recognition programs, right? And again, recognition is not just, giving a quick award or giving somebody, kudos on their review or anything like that. Recognition is really just, thanking employees for their contributions, right? And making this individualized, not just saying, hey, great job, team, which feels good, but, identifying basically individual contributions, right? And this is something where, it leads to increased engagement for all employees, right? The other one is focusing on development, and this is something where obviously it's going to apply some industries more than others, or it's going to show up differently in different industries or different companies, but developing employees within your organization, right? And recognizing what their goals are. Some employees really they just want to come to work. They just want that paycheck. They just want to put in their shift and go home, and that is fine. But there's other employees that do want to develop. They want to find a way to develop within the company to be more. So it's important to identify what those goals are and have a clear trajectory for that, right? What is the path to advancement within an organization? Is there a path for advancement? Do we want one? What's the benefits of it, right? I mean, there was some issues as far as building our workforce in the past couple of years. So that retention and that internal development, internal promotion really became more important than ever before. So focusing on that development, what our employees' goals are, and how we get there is very important. Celebrating milestones, I'm talking about celebrating, it could be professional milestones, whether it's the completion of a project, whether it's the reduction of injuries or even personal milestones, right? Marriages, birthdays, anniversaries, that sort of thing. So again, talk to your employees, because remember, not everybody likes to celebrate, right? So let's talk to our employees. Let's individualize this a little bit, If you have a small work group, it's pretty easy, right? Everybody, what their preferences are. Hey, this is Eli, he doesn't like celebrating his birthday because he feels he's over the hill or what have you. And that's fine. But, get to know your employees, and this kind of helps you get to know more about them, what's important to them, and again, build that sense of community within the workplace as well, right? Show empathy. Empathy is so important. I mean, we've all gone through a lot these past few years, right? Some people lost, neighbors, loved ones, that sort of thing. Other people just went through changes in their lives, We're all going through something at different times. So especially if you're in a position of management, if you're in a position where you're supervisor, being able to put yourself in your team's shoes, right? What are they going through? What are their struggles? Can help give you a better understanding of what they're doing and help give you a better approach to getting the most out of the team. And finally, having a sense of humor, right? I mean, we all know that how important that is. Laughter is the best medicine. We've heard all of we've heard all the sayings for this, right? So again, bringing some kind of joy, some kind of humor to the workplace, right? What can we do to help lighten up the load a little bit, Share that joy, kind of help, goes with empathy, kind of share. If you have joy within you, kind of share it with your group, right? And again, why is it important? Well, happy people are productive employees. At least that's what we hope, Give everybody a way to look forward to coming to work, right? Make it not be like a daily slog. Everyone wants to come to work. Everybody enjoys coming to work and enjoys interacting with everybody else. So some tips for making work more human, I like to call it. show gratitude, thank your employees. And that's, actually showing that you're thankful, right? I mean, turn it into action, thank you for doing this, and that could be, showing it or expressing that in front of the team. That could just be on a one-on-one basis or what have you. But again, if you are really thankful about what somebody did or somebody's doing, show that to them, let them know. Communication, always important, right? Again, share what's going on, share the expectations, talk about what's going on in the workplace. Be open to feedback from your employees, right? We have to be open to that communication, to those ideas. And finally, celebrate, how we share, let's share our successes. Let's share the big things in our life, right? Again, to help build that community, help align us all to that common purpose, that's very important. When we celebrate, if we suffer, let's suffer together, but if we celebrate, let's also celebrate together, right? Got to take the good with the bad in many cases. And some of the benefits for you, for your organization, of course, better retention, right? People feel they're cared for, people feel they're engaged, they're going to stick around with the organization. And word's going to get out, there's a great place to work. They treat their employees well, they care about us, So that's somewhere where I want to go work. It's going to help your recruitment efforts, right? Again, help your efficiency. People feel that they're getting recognized, they're going to want to work better, they're going to put their best foot forward for you. Increase engagement, increase performance for you, right? And if people feel that they belong to your workplace, if they feel that they can communicate with you, they're going to be open to sharing their ideas, right? And what better way to innovate? What better way to promote that creativity than to have that open environment where people can share those ideas with you? Okay. Improve customer service. Again, if you have, customer facing employees or people that deal with general public, if they feel cared for, if they feel, that backup, if they feel you have their backs at work, it's going to improve their interactions with the general public, right? Increase your bottom line. You got employees that are happy to be there. They're going to go in there. They're going to work hard for you. Going to reduce absence. So they're going to be there. They're going to increase your profits. And finally, safety, right? Reduce those distractions. People care about what they're doing. They're going to do it safe. They're going to look out for each other. So it's very, very important. Of course, all these things affect your bottom line. So keep an eye on these things, right? Some final reminders for you on the second half. Again, keep an eye on your pay scales, right? Maintain them, update your job titles. I always recommend taking a look at your pay scales, take a look at your job descriptions on a regular basis. Whether it's a position change, whether it's a promotion or whatever it is, take a look at them. These are living documents. Make sure you're updating them as you go. That drug and alcohol policy, again, we got changes to cannabis users. So review your drug and alcohol policy. Make sure that it is still follows all the regulations. And again, if you do drug testing, talk to your clinic, talk to your drug test provider, see what they're going to do to stay compliant with these cannabis regulations. Update your forms, your CFR policy, your handbook, all that stuff. Make sure that that's all updated for you. That includes your bereavement policy. And then again, be aware of those local minimum wage changes, whether they change mid-year and what's coming up early next year as well. Take a look at your pay scales, take a look at your compensation plan, see what you are going to do, with your pay, with your compensation, to make sure you follow that. And of course, I-9s, got the new I-9 form on there, got the I-9 remote flexibilities that ended. You got a few more days to verify all those documents by hand. So again, take a look at that new I-9. If you have any questions with it, give us a call. We're more than happy to help with it. So before I hand it off too, I would like to remind everybody that we do have a complimentary human resources hotline brought to you by the city of Glendale and partner with CEA. So if you have any questions regarding any kind of human resource topic, whether it's hiring, firing, paid sick leave, CFRA, FMLA, the I-9 form, whatever it is, give us a call. Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. We are happy to help, happy to hear from you. Number is 866-248-3074. If you have any questions about this presentation, or you walk away and you're thinking, what the heck was he talking about? Give us a call. We will be more than happy to discuss it with you. A little bit of housekeeping too. We also do offer membership plans for anybody that wants to become a member of CEA. 3 different levels: Ultimate Premier and Associate. And before I hand it off, I know that the city had another announcement for you. I would like to give some codes for anybody that's here for continuing education too. We have the HRCI codes 631-627. That's 631-627. And if you are doing continuing education for SHRM, that code is 23-7Q9DN. Do not forget that dash. SHRM hates it when you forget that dash, so do not forget it, whatever you do. We also would love some feedback from you, what you liked about this presentation, what you'd like to hear about, anything like that. Let's see, HRCI code 631-627, just to review that. Yes. So if you'd like to give us some feedback on the presentation, something you'd like to hear about in the future, please scan that QR code. It'll take you to a link. You can give us the feedback, what you liked, what you didn't like, what you'd like to hear about, anything like that. So with that, that brings me to the end of my information. I'll hand it over to Anna and Ani with anything additional they'd like to throw in at the end here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eli and Heather. That was a great presentation. And thank you all for joining us as well. Please do save the date for our third webinar, which will take place on October 18 at 10 a.m. And the topic for that webinar is proper steps of a legal termination. In addition to this webinar, my colleague Juan Gonzalez will host a webinar on August 30th next week called Procurement 2.0 Best Practices for All. And in honor of Women's Equality Day, we will be showcasing how women and minority-owned business certification can help get government, utility, and private sector grants. I will post the link to register in the chat box. Oh, seems like he just did. Awesome. So we hope to see you all there and at our next CEA and City of Glendale sponsored webinar in October. Thank you all so much.
All right. Lots of information packed into less than an hour and a half. So yes, I really encourage you to sign up for those two upcoming trainings that they mentioned. I also dropped a link into the chat for our upcoming free I-9, the new I-9 form coming up on September 26th. That's going to be very, very valuable. The last thing I dropped into the chat was our survey that I mentioned. Literally takes 2 minutes, but that information that you provide for us or provide to us allows us to continue to develop these resources. So link is in the chat, or you can easily snap the QR code on your screen right now. But other than that, thank you all for your time today and your attention, your amazing questions. We really do hope that you found this presentation valuable. To find out about future webinars and forums, you can go to City of Glendale website, and you can also visit CEA at employers.org. And thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye. Thank you all.
you.
Cheers.